Disclaimer. We are two regular guys who love to talk Bone Thugs and Harmony. We do not represent Bone Thugs or any Bone affiliate. We are also not Bone Thugs experts. The views and information you hear in this podcast may be based on personal opinion. Please feel free to leave corrections and clarifying information in the comments. And enjoy.
What's up, y'all? Once again, it is Beyond the Harmony, beyondtheharmony.com, Thug Thursday. I am your host, Cecil West, with the one and only. Yeah, that's right, guys. No Johnny on this episode, at least for right now. Maybe he'll get an opportunity to call in. John is away taking care of a few things, so for the time being, this is Beyond the Harmony. Welcome to the West Side, and I'll be rocking it solo tonight. But we got a great episode tonight. Either way, and I'll tell you why. We've been recording episodes for months now, and we've talked to some of the greats. And especially in the last couple weeks, we have had the opportunity to speak to, Mohart, Romeo, Archie, so many of your Mo Thug heroes. And we talk about the sound. We talk about what made that Mo Thug sound. We talk about what made that feeling that you got when you popped in the first Mo Thug disc or the second Mo Thug disc. And a huge piece of that, we start to understand came from production, came from the mixing, came from Romeo, from Archie. And tonight, we find out another huge piece of it, the piece that came from Bobby Jones. So I'm excited. And as I look, do I have my own guest before my guest? Hold on. Who do we have?
You got John Liffey. Yeah, I'm playing hooky right now, man. I'm on call and I'm under the gun right now, but I couldn't miss hopping on to Beyond the Harmony to help my cohort out, get the fire started before Bobby Jones kicks in. Talk some, because we're two boys that love to talk that Bone Thug, so I can't miss out on that every single week.
Yeah, I got it started. There were some crickets, but we were doing it. We were here, but it's good to have Johnny riding shotgun, and I think we're gonna have Bobby calling in relatively quickly because he is excited. I've been talking to him all week. I've actually been, it's funny. I've been talking to Bobby for quite some time. I initially seeked him out, just because I felt he was the unrecognized in what we would recognize as the Mo Thug sound. Like we know, we knew Romeo, right? And I think the big piece we knew Romeo was Graveyard Shift. But of course we knew him for doing other things, but that was like the big thing. And then we knew Archie's in Too True. So we're talking about guys that were part of a group as well as making the sound. Crazy Bone, but Bobby has so much to do with the fucking sound that it's crazy to me. And I was like, wow, no one really talks about Bobby Jones the way they should. Like, no one's really talking about how, like, bro, do you realize, have you looked at this man's credits? It's crazy to me. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. He's like the original. He's part of that. We've been trying to find what crafted that original sound. You know, that Ruthless sound, that pre-Ruthless sound, but not quite the post-Ruthless sound. And Bobby Jones' name is on all the albums that we all love. So it's going to be neat to hear his angle. Plus, since we've spoken with a few other producers and stuff that have done it, now we kind of got a feel for some of the things that those guys said, and it'll be neat to hear Bobby's angle. And hopefully we'll have better questions, not better, but different types of angles to find out Bobby's angle to the whole Mo Thug mystery.
Yeah, I think this is something different, because I mean we had a 9-hour interview with Romeo. We just had a 2-hour interview with Archie. But like I said, you think of those guys when you think of Mo Thug. I mean, and this isn't a knock at Bobby. This is more like why the fuck aren't we talking more about Bobby Jones? Because this guy, bro, he had a lot to do with it, a lot to do with the sound Thug Devotion, bro. Trey, Take Your Time. Mo Murder. These are all Bobby Jones tracks. And the guy also, let's not leave out, he produced and worked on Faces of Death, which is always a hot topic here. And I think that's important when you think about the scenario, okay? Because when people talk about producers that worked with Bone and what made the Bone sound, of course, everybody says DJ Unique. And then when you get later on, people talk about other producers as well. But when you have one that's been there since the very first record, and then they're involved with later records, some of these producers walk in and they know Bone Thugs and Harmony. It was easy to make records for Bone Thugs and Harmony. They'd established that sound. But Bobby's been there from the beginning, so I think that's what's going to make, that's just such a thing to know. And he was involved with the Flesh and Bone album as well. Probably some of your favorite Flesh and Bone tracks.
Yeah, and it seems like he also got some work out of some of the things that Romeo got also, because I see he's got some Fat Joe credits, some Big Pun credits, Snoop and Corrupt, and Run DMC, and these are all collabos that did stuff with Bone and DMX, and I think Badass did something with Bone. Didn't Badass and Busy Bone made an album together? Or was that, yeah. And Bobby produced the first Bone, Big Pun, Fat Joe feature, which was on the True's Humble and United Gathering Souls album, yeah. So, and actually, I think, if I'm looking, I think we might have him in here. Hold up. Bobby, you with us?
Yo.
All right, there he is. What's up, brother? Thanks for coming on, man. We appreciate you taking the time to be our guest tonight.
This is so cool.
So I don't know how long you've been dialed in. I was actually not on my duties here, and I was scanning the questions, so I don't know how much you heard. But we were just catching in, the listeners up to a little bit of what you've done with Bone. If you've listened to our show at all, you know that we talk a lot of Bone Thugs and Harmony on here, and we like to talk about the things that may not have been highlighted during the story that were important, or the things that really tell the story that is kind of unknown. And I think that your contribution is so massive and yet so underrated to the fans, or maybe just unknown because you weren't put out there as an artist producer the way maybe like Archie and Romeo were. So I think it's a huge story to tell, and I'm glad you took the time to come on and do this with us. I think the first thing that we should talk about before we even talk about Bone, or we talk about any of that, is, when did you start, just producing hip-hop in general? I mean, was it around the time of Bone Enterprise, or had you been doing it well before then?
I think well before that. I think there was a studio that we were working at, and it was a common studio, and I think you and I talked offline about Eugene Jackson and his contribution to it. And we were doing a lot of hip hop there. We were working with a lot of Cleveland groups. And doing that, I was doing a lot of other production because I actually had came from playing keys with the Rude Boys. And pretty much like Gerald Levert kind of pretty much gave me my start to approve me to play with the Rude Boys and everything else on road. So I think we were doing a lot of that. And I think I just came off of doing the Arsenio Hall show with the Rude Boys. And then we came back home and then actually got introduced to the guys through Kermit. And he was like, because Eugene was currently doing production on their songs. And then Kermit called and said, hey, you know, we love for the guys to spend more time in the studio because he was working, you know, right at that time he had them under management. He was going to put a record out and he wasn't really satisfied with some of the earlier sound that he was getting at the other studios. So he was asking us to kind of like put it together and help them get it on there. We didn't know. We did a lot of tracks. A lot of tracks didn't make that album. I'd definitely like to know where those masters are. But we did a lot of songs with everybody because Kermit wanted to include everybody in it. So even if he wasn't really satisfied with the sound at that time, he made sure that everybody was inclusive for the projects that he worked on before working with us. So indirectly, I think it's kind of like we picked up where everybody else left off. And but I had been doing hip hop and stuff for a long period of time before that.
Yeah, you know, I think if my understanding is right, is that they may have started recording, you know, that project like with Archie. I know Archie had like a basement studio, and you know, it was interesting to hear you bring up Eugene because it was a question I had actually had with you in private. And you know, when the fans talk about Faces of Death, Kermit is the go-to. We were actually. You know, we jumped this show off by really talking about K Chill and exposing the fans to just K Chill and his contribution. And Eugene Jackson is another one of those names that I think is kind of unspoke about in the Faces of Death. Can you just kind of talk about, you know, his role and his contribution in Faces of Death?
Well, Eugene was one of the producers with Brothers for the Struggle. And the studio that he had with his business partner, Trev, was the one we recorded at. And Eugene was already maybe on song 2 or 3 when the guys were introduced to me. And pretty much I think I even played keys on a couple of those songs. And but Eugene was definitely an integral part because he opened his studio to them to do endless amount of production, you know, way beyond a certain rate. You know what I'm saying? It's like, you know, if it was $5, they got $500 worth.
Yeah.
So so his part of actually working on and producing the songs is definitely an untold story because again he had just about an integral part of it as I did. He kind of started it off and I kind of picked up from there as far as some of the other production of it because then even some of the songs that he produced, I ended up either playing keys on it or mixing it in the studio when we got finished. So a lot of the stuff that he did that didn't make the track or did make the album was definitely part of the Bone sound. Yeah. The irony of the Bone sound, how it came about, was we made things work. Like you said, Archie had a basement studio. The studio that Eugene and them, we all had, it was pretty much a glorified basement studio. This happened to be in a building.
Yeah.
And actually 4 walls that was there. And didn't have much in the studio. So part of the Bone sound came from what we didn't have. A lot of the stuff that, you know, because then again, it's like, especially working with Anthony, he had a vision. And within the vision, sometimes we couldn't accomplish that, or we didn't have a reverb unit, or we didn't have, or our compression sucked or everything else. So we kind of did the best we can with it, and that kind of developed part of the sound. And I remember some of the doubling and tripling and actually the repeating or like the echoes and stuff like that was from lack of having a good reverb unit or a good delay unit. So it was like, no, I'll just do it. I'll do it in the booth. And so that's part of what that whole thing, it would go on because then I remember later on we would be in big $1 million studios and Anthony is still doubling and tripling and repeating stuff. And it's like, and the engineer will look at me, be like, I can just hit this button here. And I was like, but it feels good when he does it. So let him do it. You know what I'm saying? Like, it had a different feel. But because they'll look at us like, why is he doing that? We can just do that with this button here. Like, we never had that. Let him do this.
That's funny that you say that, because I've heard, I've seen the videos of him recording, like, just like doing like his layers and things like that, and I've literally heard him, only wait, shit like that. So so it's crazy to hear you say that. Like, I know you said that there were tracks, and fans have always asked, are there unreleased Faces of Death tracks? How many tracks do you think you produced for them roughly around that time?
I think by the time I took over, and not necessarily took over in a sense of like doing everything, but like took over as far as like picking up where, because Eugene actually had a day job too. He actually worked at this gas station. So a lot of the stuff is either like mix this or do other things. I think we had there's a good 12 to 15 to maybe even in the small 20s of tracks that didn't make the project, because that was another thing, like with Kermit as being an executive producer, he wanted to make sure everybody was all inclusive. So it wasn't going to be just us doing all that. So some of those songs may have got bumped because he wanted to make sure that everybody had a part in the project. Yeah. And it was so funny, because then, like, trying to figure out where, because I don't throw nothing away, but I know that I think at the time, the studio either stuff was put away or put in storage, or maybe a flood hit a couple of times. Yeah, because that building would always get flooded, and we just never kept everything after the fact, after we made the album. But I'm sure somebody has a box somewhere. I bet you if you ask Eugene, he might find something in his basement.
Yeah, I don't know. I think K. Chill says he has some tracks that no one heard. I know he sent me a picture of like a DAT tape of Faces of Death. So I don't know if he's got anything else on that besides what actually came out. But yeah, I know he was involved. Did you do any tracks for K. Chill or any other artists, like with the Stonyburg Jammit crew with that Kermit had?
I think. If I didn't produce it, I touched it in some way, whether it had been a mixed or played keys on it.
Yeah.
I think it may be one or two like that I actually submitted, but the actual ones that actually came out, I may have either did a mix on it or I may have played keys on it.
Right. Well, I mean, it's funny. Anytime we talk to somebody that was around during this time frame, and we talk about Bone Enterprises, Kermit's the big topic there. And what it was like. I mean, what was it like for you working with Kermit? I mean, because he is quite the interesting, persona.
Well, my interaction with Kermit was always in a like an older uncle talking to like something like, yo, these guys are irresponsibility. I remember getting a call from him and saying, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm in the studio. He said, I'm about to send the boys over, and he's telling me, like, I think it was busy at the time. I think he was having trouble at home and got kicked out, and he was like, I just want to make sure that you could keep them in the studio and keep them out of trouble, because he was worried about they might get in trouble. So I'm like, yeah, bring them to the studio, because I had the night shift. I was there all night, every night, and pretty much, so then if it even seemed like, then they would call and be like, hey, what's up? I'm like, I'm at the studio. We coming by. And sometimes we'll end up being in there 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the morning, just in there just creating. And sometimes that was a lot of those were off the clock, because it was more so like just keeping them busy,
Yeah.
And so with Kermit, giving me those instructions, like to kind of like look out for him, we kind of took it to heart, and that's what it kind of like made it a place where they could at least come if they weren't at Archie's or somebody else. It was like, hey, come on by, whatever it do to keep you off the street. So Kermit actually looked out for him, and he did, like I said, whatever he paid for, he paid for it, like, out of his pocket. And if it became a little extra and everything else, sometimes we'll just make a decision, well, it's on the house, because right. Again, it's like we didn't get really anything done, but we did keep them, there was just more so they was in the studio writing and working. And I'm not going to charge you for writing in another room.
Kermit had a really, he had a large roster of artists at that point.
He did.
Did you feel like he knew the guys in Bone were special, or was he just trying to, punch as many tickets as possible and hope one became the big number?
No, it was they were special not as artists, but as kids looking out for them, because they were like 15 and 16. So they were special to both me and him, as like myself looking out for my little brothers, and for him looking out for his kids, in other words. So they were special to him, meaning like he really liked them on a personal level, and whatever it takes to keep them out, keep them out of trouble. That's what he was willing to do. So I don't think he even had the like these guys are special musically, because at that time he really hadn't heard anything yet, because we had yet to turn in those projects.
Right.
Like he heard them doing what they do, but I think he had a special place in their heart just because they were good kids, and he wanted to keep them off the street.
Also, of course, around that time, Diego Black is real involved with Faces of Death. He's kind of credited as the guy that got Bone with Easy when he did the show in Cleveland, and they got backstage. Did you have interaction with Diego Black at all?
In passing, because again, it's like our interaction was like I never met anybody outside the studio. Like it never went on their side of town. They always came to us. So a lot of those people I met either later or talked to maybe on the phone or just saw in passing.
Right. Okay, so same situation with Archie. Did you work with Archie at all during this project, or?
I worked with Archie more when we were in LA than I did on the project, because again, it was more so like over the phone. Hey, I'm sending over this track, or us calling over there. Hey, Archie, do you have this? Whatever the case may be. So a lot of even though we had interaction in Cleveland, we had a closer interaction in LA. Okay,
all right, that's cool. That's kind of cool that you guys really didn't, cross paths like that while you were in the same city, and then you guys end up on the label together. But we'll get there. This is the one. I feel like we did the Faces of Death warm up, and now I'm going to get into something good. I did a big interview with Kate Chill. Kate Chill kind of broke a little information to the Bone fans that really kind of set the internet on fire for the Bone world for a second, and then Archie backed it up that there was a fifth member before Flesh that was kicked out before Faces of Death even got, started recording, or very early recording. Do you remember there being another member that got the axe?
Yes, I remember. I not only do I remember some of the conversation. And again, like you said, like you come, like you hear a conversation, you walk into the room, and they'll be like, and he did this, and we did that, and they did this, and he tripping, and they tripping, blah, blah, blah. And then you walk out and everything else. But I do remember knowing that he didn't make the cut, and then actually even having a conversation with Kermit saying that, hey, so on and so forth, but these are the guys, and blah, 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 and everything else, and this is what they want. So I do remember the it being another member, but again, it was more so on hearsay or after the fact. Like, I'm overhearing a conversation. I'm not really getting into the drama of what happened, but then you hear it talk about.
It's pretty interesting. Kate Chill remembered it kind of as, he was going to be a member of the group. And, Archie was like, there was a guy named Fish, but he was more just kind of with the crew. I didn't really look at him as like a rapper. So the story's still kind of out there as to who he was and what his involvement was. But it's kind of good to know that there was this other guy. This is always something I like to ask somebody, because this is an interesting piece about this, and it's just kind of a fun question. How'd you feel about that bright yellow album cover for Faces of Death when that came out?
Oh, well, see, this is the funny part about it. So my day job at the time, transitioning, I was a graphic artist. And what happened, it was like I was real good real early. So that afforded me to get expensive equipment, which was the keyboards and everything else. So music was a hobby that actually became a job based upon my talents as a graphic artist. So when I begged and pleaded, can we fix it? can we do something with it? Let me grab it. They're stretched out. Can we at least get, this, my OCD just kicked in. And Kermit was like, no, kind of. No, he didn't say no. He was real politically correct. He was like, well, let me see. Let me check it with the guys, because then that was their artwork in some cases, in a case in point or something like that. And I was like, well, I don't want to change the art. I just want to fix it, And I think it never got fixed because it came out, after everything else. But yeah, I do remember it didn't sit too well. It was like, because they send you something how you think, and it's almost like having your wife ask you, do you look fat in this dress? you try to really figure it out, like, what's the best way I can do this?
It's wild, because we talked to Jason Bibb, and Jason's who drew the Grim Reaper, and he was like, I drew an entire background for that. And he's like, but the way we had to print things back then, you had to print all those colors, so it was better for them to just cut the Grim Reaper out and then have a single solid color as the background. But initially he had a big graveyard scene for that Grim Reaper.
See, that would have been so much better.
He's actually who also drew the remaster that Kermit did years later. So he did get his second shot to make sure it looked good. Do you remember at that time, did Bone, as Bone Enterprise, did they do any live shows as Bone Enterprise, like locally or anything? Did anybody get to see them live during that time?
It was a few clubs, but the problem is that they were too young to do any main clubs, because these are 15 and 16-year-olds performing at bars and not all ages clubs. So the ones they did get performed was like the homie handshake, sneak them in, sneak them out, or that they would let everybody else in, but then they say, well, we can't get Busy in because Busy was younger than everybody else. Yeah. And then that was issue too, so they didn't do as many shows as they could have because of their age. But, they did do a few here and there. It would be like, and then after that I would get like, yo, I'm coming to the studio, and they would talk about the set and whatever the case may be. I never physically saw a show, but I know that there were shows that they did before then, but they couldn't do as many as they should have because they were too young.
Right. Yeah, we always know that, people always talk about the Band-Aid Boys and the talent shows and the stuff like that, but we've always kind of wondered, like, were they out there doing those songs live? But that makes sense, with their age. You had said something like Little Brothers. Is there an age gap between you and Bone as far as, how old you are?
Damn. I think it's a huge age gap. The bad part about it, but yeah, I think realistically, I think I got 10 on them.
Yeah, it was like Archie. Archie was like, I'm older than these guys. So
yeah. I think Archie and I, I think we had 10 on, because then it was like you had Kermit, who was pretty much, if you want to put in family in inspiration, Kermit was that. He was like maybe old enough to be our uncle. We were like old enough to be, a big brother to them or older brother. And then, they were just like, our responsibility to make sure that you stay out of trouble. Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely a gap.
As far as
but they grew up so fast, you never knew it. Because then still again, when I see Aunt's birthday or Busy's birthday, and it's like, are you kidding me right now?
So I mentioned the re-release to you that Kermit did. The re-release, of course, he did a couple of them. He re-released the original with the yellow cover, and then he actually re-released it again with a brand new cover. And he did this around the time that Bone released their first and second records with Ruthless. I heard that re-release because of, again, the strength of Bone Thugs and Harmony. When he did that, it sold enough copies to chart on Billboard. Do you know if there's any truth to that as to how well that re-release did?
That re-release did really well, and there was a lot of truth because there was a lot of money owed to myself and Archie and a lot of people. And pretty much we are in California, and I'm getting calls like, yo, we need to get some representation because this re-release. And my thing is like this. if it re-released and it sold a few hundred copies, you're not going to say anything. But when you're re-releasing our work and it's selling, a little bit under 1 million, almost like it could definitely officially get a gold or platinum status, then it's like, hey, dude, you kind of need to give us a little bit of that. I'm not going to chase you for $5, but I will chase you for $50,000.
And I mean, do we know, or do you think that the Bone Enterprise record might have been creeping up on a gold record number?
It's past gold. I know it's past gold because I remember the funny part about it, like if you look at, when you do record royalties and everything else, that's a complex math, and only a few lawyers who are in the entertainment business know that math. Ironically, I used to have one of those lawyers, and it was like, in the same office as their lawyer. So there was a conflict of interest too, because then again, it's like their lawyer was one of their offices was one of my lawyers, and it's like, well, I can't have you represent me because you're not going to sue your firm. But then we had more of because then when you sue somebody, do you go to Bone, who had nothing to do with it? They didn't want the album out to begin with, or do you go to the person putting it out, which was Kermit?
Right. And, I mean, at that time, they would have definitely. I mean, we're talking the re-release happened in 95 and 96. Yep. So I mean, we're talking right around Eternal and the first Mo Thug album. I'm sure that Bone definitely didn't want a hot press on that. Never mind the gold record that they were not seeing any of the bread from.
But what made it worse is that, and I think Archie could attest for that, we were in LA starving. Like if I we'll probably get into that a little later, but we were in LA starving, and all of a sudden there's our work out on sales doing very, very well on the charts.
Yeah. Some of those sales too, I mean, just came off pure confusion. Even, my co-host, he ended up buying his very first copy of Bone Enterprise because Kermit scheduled it and planned it for like the same day that E1999 Eternal came out.
Yes.
So, I mean, it was very fucking smart of this guy, and I do believe Eternal's date may have even changed, and Kermit still came out, and a bunch of copies got sold off pure confusion. So, real smart guy. Before we transition to Mo Thugs, just speaking of, Kermit, did you? We had talked about K-Chill. I know you did some production for some of the other artists. One of them, Brothers for the Struggle, you did some work for them. One track that sticks out to me is The Devil Came to Cleveland, which, I know you produced, and Hell Sent by Bone Enterprise. They got a very similar feel, not just the beat production, but even the lyrical content. I mean, was this coincidence, or, is there more to this situation?
It was coincidence in the simple fact that it was like it happened at the same time, because then I had another song with Teddy Riley, the same type of situation where we both had the same general ideal at the same time. And it's pretty much whoever had the bigger song is the one that gets the credit for it, even though it was the same amount of time on it. So definitely it was a coincidence, because with the Brothers for the Struggle, I purposely knew what it was going to be. But when it came to the Bone song, that was like an idea brought to me. So then I said, I did this for them. And then I think Ant's response was like, okay, well, we'll do it a little bit different. And I'm like, all right. So then, you have, as an engineer and as a producer, you have to be equal across the board. So again, as them being a client, I have to give them what they want, but then I had to give them full disclosure. I did this track with, Brothers for the Struggle already. He hadn't heard it. So then, even when we were producing the track in their studio, I remember Trev coming in. He says, yo, that sounds really close to. And I was like, I know. I told him that, but then later on, Trev was like, gave it his blessing. He like, I just, it is what it is. which again was like, it could have been worse. It could have never saw the light of day, Bone's part of it, or it just could have been a big blow up.
As a fan, I mean, as a Bone fan, it was kind of cool to hear that later on, the Brothers for the Struggle, song, and just like, it's almost like another chapter from another group in Cleveland. So, it was an interesting thing to hear. I'll make sure to link that in the description for the fans to hear. I did notice while we're talking about just other groups that you produced with at that time. Do you remember Mr. Money Loke?
Yes.
So maybe you can answer this question. He put out a record. He actually put out a record after, I believe, Bone had gone on to achieve some fame. And he put out a record, and on the front of the cover, he's got 2 copies of Faces of Death in his hand, almost crumpled up. Do you know, did he have a legitimate issue with Bone, or was that just kind of some maybe some studio-made issue to help sell records?
No, he had a legitimate issue, but again, at that time, Bone was so far gone from that either they didn't know there was an issue still, or they did know the issue, and they were already living their lives, because then his was released locally, and Bone was like now a national act.
Yeah.
So even though there was a legitimate beef, it was like they weren't even, it wasn't even on their radar, and if it was on their radar, they didn't care.
What do you know? I mean, do you know if the beef was just that they left? What I mean, was his label home at the time, Stony Brook, kind of blew up without him, or I mean, something more to it?
It's definitely more to it, and it's one of those type of things where you have to ask them, because anything I know was either hearsay or a rah-rah conversation, or just pieces of it. Because again, it's like a lot of times, like a lot of stuff that you say, I'm aware of, but mind you, I'm in the studio like 24/7 with them, so I'm hearing it when I'm stepping out and getting a breath of fresh air. Then then I'm coming back in. But because I don't forget anything, I kind of remember the conversation.
So then let's talk. We all, we know Faces of Death. Of course, they put Faces of Death out locally. It flops. They seek out Eazy-E. Eazy-E shows up in Cleveland. Diego Black helps get them to the back. They find out they're going. They make it to Cleveland. These guys now have a deal. Their first record is out. When they're working on their second record, Mo Thugs is going to be a thing. Before Mo Thugs, before you worked on the first Mo Thug record, was there any work between you and Bone, between Faces of Death and Family Scriptures, where they were working on, their Eternal album or anything like that?
No, that the East 1999 Eternal album was pretty much done in the can. So there was no work to be done. How I came in was funny, because again, it's like Bone. I think I was going through a personal situation. I was going through maybe a split, and I remember I was working with Deuce Mob, which is a Cleveland group also, and they when the guys were like, "Yo, let's go to this party. Bone is going to be the guys are going to be down at the Mirage." And I'm like, okay. So I go to the party. I'm like, still pissed about this breakup I'm going through. And I remember going in there, and I remember the guys coming in, and Lazy made a beeline. It's like, yo, Bobby's here, dude. We've been looking for you. We need you. We about to get a label. We going back to California. When can you go? And I'm like, here's my number, and so on and so forth. And it was like, we leaving tomorrow. And I didn't have anything to lose, and ended up, calling them. They booking the flights. I'm talking to somebody. They getting my information and booking the flight and everything else. And about 2 days later, I'm in Burbank, California, and it's about to go down. And then, Lazy's trying to catch me up with him. We gonna do this and we gonna do that. And then that's when, I relink up with Archie personally, face to face, and Archie's doing this, and these guys are doing that, and you meet all the crew and everything else, and I'm like, this is really about to go down. Still not knowing what we're into, but you have nothing to lose, and it's like they need me, and it's like, yo, I'm like, let's go. And it wasn't even like, I didn't even know what "we need you" meant at that time.
Yeah, that's crazy. So, so by the time they had done that, I mean, it sounds like there had been a pretty significant gap of time between seeing Bone the last time and then seeing him then. So, I mean, you basically
about a year and a half. It was about, it was legitimately a year and a half, because then I had went on to hanging out with Guy and did a couple of songs with some of their groups on Motown, and then just kind of like this coming back and forth, going back and forth to New York, and then but still coming back home to Cleveland, and then that's when it happened. So it was about a year and a half.
So when Mo Thugs forms, they want you to be part of it. You immediately end up in LA. Did you did you have a multi-album contract with them, or did you remain independent? Like Romeo remained independent and never signed on, or were you actually an artist under Mo Thugs?
We had zero paperwork. Because I went from engineer, because they were like, these engineers don't know how to do it in LA. We need you to give us what we got here in Cleveland. So I got you. So I went from engineer to composer to producer in seconds. So there was it moved so lightning fast, there was no paperwork. And that's what kind of ended up sadly in court, because there was no paperwork. And I remember it was everything was like a blink of an eye. First you're engineering, then all of a sudden you're playing keys on songs, and all of a sudden I'm producing the song, and then all of a sudden we're doing tracks on tracks on tracks, because they're steadily constantly working. And go ahead.
I was going to say Soulja Boy remembers it the same way that you just described it. You just said it all happened so fast from Mo Thugs 1 up to Mo Thugs 2. He said that time span all happened so fucking fast that he's like, we didn't have time to think about it. Everything just happened.
And that's what was the trippy part about it, because then there started to be some rumblings hey, we need to get paid, and then also it was well, they can't put out a record with us out of signing, so it's going to happen eventually, and then the record came out without us signing. It was oh my God, what's really going down? Because then when we were in LA, there was a guy that was handling it. He works for Ruthless. His name was Steve Lobel. And Steve Lobel was pretty much how Kermit came to me, is how Cliff Kateri at Ruthless came to him. Look out for these guys. Keep them out of trouble. But when I came in, they were already kicked out of an apartment complex called the Oakwoods already, and they were in there with Jodeci. So a rite of passage in L.A., when you're coming out to be a new group, it's getting kicked out of the Oakwoods. So I remember they were in the same time as Jodeci, and I knew most of the people from Jodeci, because then I was working with a couple other groups in Cleveland that actually was in that same camp. So it was one of those type of things. When we got there, there was this guy named Steve Lobel, and he was pretty much the person that was supposed to take care of us. Now, he gave all of us pretty much a per diem on Friday. Our per diem at that time was $125 a week. So we were living off of $125 a week per diem. That was to wash clothes, to eat, whatever you needed to do, because housing was already taken care of for us. That was taken care of by the label. But that's what we lived off of for about a good year. And sometimes 125 didn't come on time. Steve would be on the road, or he would be doing something else, and we may not got it on a Friday. We may have got it on a Saturday or Sunday, or maybe the next Monday. But yeah, that was a crazy time. So then that was another thing, especially as far as Archie and I are concerned, when you find out there's a record that's doing really well on the radio, and you're in LA with, you barely can keep your phone on, living off $125 a week in Los Angeles. Cost of living is huge.
Huge, massive. If any of the listeners have never ever been to LA, just breathing air in LA is expensive.
Breathing air in LA costs you about $20. Yes.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So I could imagine, and even back then, with the cost of living changing over a 20-year period, it was still expensive back then. You had said you went from Cleveland to LA. It all happened so fast. I imagine, was there a significant equipment upgrade for you as a producer going from your smaller studio, glorified basement studio in Cleveland to these massive LA studios?
Well, no, because I was already an engineer, and ironically speaking, Trent Reznor taught me Pro Tools from Nine Inch Nails. He was working at Beechwood Studios, so I was recording at Beechwood Studios.
Wow, that's crazy.
So Trent Reznor was kind of my teacher, so I already had the engineering chops. So that's why I could go into the bigger studios, and by the time you told me how to turn on the board, I was running it.
Yeah. Hey, that's awesome. So that makes sense why they needed you. They knew you could walk right in. You knew what they wanted. You'd already worked with them previously, and you had an understanding of how crazy worked. I've heard that during the Mo Thugs time that you were brought in to try to focus on the R&B side, like Trey. I mean, was that the situation?
No, like I said. I mean, the thing is, the first step was engineer first and foremost. But then, as Crazy wanted to get into production, it was like I was his hands. He would whisper me a melody, and I would play it. He would word off and everything else. So I was his hands, his drum machine. So that became everything across the board. The R&B stuff was cool, but I never, like I said, doing Trey's R&B stuff was like an afterthought because it was more so everybody had a need. So it was whoever got into the studio and needed their projects done, we did across the board. So doing a lot of stuff for Trey's R&B side was cool, but because they were so far, they were out on the road with the guys because the guys still was touring. So they were out on the road. They were the girls that sung the lead for, Crossroads.
Yeah.
And also, so they were in and out too. So they didn't get legitimately as much of studio time as everybody else did because they were traveling with the guys, and also it was a male dominated situation, so the girls needed to get in sometime, and they're like, yeah, we'll give them a chance, but their chance, they got in when they fit in.
It seemed like Trey was going to be the initial big push from the label, and I've always speculated that a huge part of that was due to what you had just mentioned, the success of that intro of the Crossroads in the church, which I'm singing. I mean, is that pretty much it? I mean, because that was so huge. Everyone knew that part, their part of the video. And I think that people assumed that they would be much bigger than they were. Do you know what it was that prevented them? Because they kind of fell out of the Mo Thug fold even before, any of the other OG Mo Thugs started falling out.
It was well, I'm trying to put this politically correct. It was no fault of their own, but yet they were victim with being girls, and so they were the only girls, and I think it was 15, 20 of us that was out there in there. So they were out on the road with Bone, so they didn't get their legitimate studio time. Also, some of them may or may not have had relationships with some of the members of Bone. So now your girlfriend now, so that immediately puts you on the back burner. Immediately.
And they didn't really have two trues, two females, of course, but they had Archie there to kind of Archie
was the reason that Too True could move forward, because Archie wasn't going to have that situation. He was going to make sure that his group got taken care of, because in Bone, when all of us are out there, a closed mouth didn't get fed. And Archie had a big voice. So Too True was going to get their studio time, which actually kind of bumped Trey, who was actually the heir apparent, to getting their stuff. But, Archie has to take care of his, so that's a good business move on his part.
Yeah, and it's it's always interesting too, because I think of what Trey probably wanted as a solo. When I say solo, meaning the three of them, record is probably significantly different than what Bone fans probably wanted to hear. Because Bone fans really knew them, of course, just from the Mo Thug album, and then those couple of features. They did a First of the Month remix, and then the Crossroads intro. And my guess is their album would have sounded even more like Take Your Time, probably even past that.
And we did a lot of those type of songs. We did songs like Here. We did a lot of those type of R&B Bone songs with them singing. The funny part about it, about the lead of Crossroads, the Crossroads we know today is a remix. It's not the original Crossroads that was on the album.
Right, of course, yeah.
Now, to backtrack, Bone was at home in Cleveland at a Christmas break. The original Crossroads is still on the album. Ant had a melody in his head. He runs immediately down. We were in the studio, and he's like, I need something for this beat. So I'm pulling it up, and I'm playing it. The actual original bed for Crossroads is now was Flesh and Bone's World So Cruel. The Crossroads original remix for Crossroads was now Flesh and Bone's World So Cruel.
You know what's crazy to me about
Anthony
hearing
he needed a bed to write to. So I'm playing something. I'm pulling it up. I'm trying to pull it up as fast as I can. So I'm laying on the drums, laying on the keyboards. In fact, he's coming up with the Crossroads mix while I'm putting together the song. And then the rest of the guys are on their way. Busy comes in next. He's ready to roll. He's like, is it done yet? So Busy go off, get a smoke on. Amp's putting down the vibe. Lazy and Wish come in, and they put down pretty much the basic pieces. The song never really got it complete, just the scratch of it. So, and Amp was like, cut that off, because that's where he was working 2-inch. So I remember cutting it off the reel and giving him a 2-inch, like a master, to take with him in a small box, because they had to get back to L.A.
Yeah.
So we're still in Cleveland at this time. So I'm cutting it off the 2-inch. I'm giving him a small box, and then that's when they went ahead and did the Crossroads remix and bumped off the original Crossroads on the album, because they reprinted them up, because the remix took off like fire. And then what makes matters even worse is that Crossroads beat out the Beatles record.
Yeah.
It broke record. It beat out the Beatles record. The bad part about it, it was short-lived, because then I think it was like a week and a half, then Boys II Men came out with I'll Make Up with the End of the Road or whatever thing, and that bumped in. So then Boys II Men, because that song stayed on the charts longer at number one, gets the credit for beating out the Beatles and Elvis' record, but actually Bone Thugs was the one that first to do it. Now, one of the things that they did do, which kind of was aggravating, was that the record company stopped making production of the single because they wanted to use those sales for the album. So that song could even broke more records had it still continued to be a single, but Ruthless was like, hey, we needed to make it an album. And I remember being in L.A. at that time, and off the record having to make a radio version of that, cutting the song down at the studio called Artemis. So it was like, hey, you get a call from Ruth, hey, can you make this a radio thing? So I'm like, all right. So you hear the original song, and then they made a cut, and then Ruth was like, can you? And then getting the call from Relativity, can you make even another cut of it? So the cut on the album is an unaccredited another cut of the cut that they already had made.
Wow,
so
that's crazy. And I mean, we as fans know how many transitions that song went through. But I don't think we knew there was that many. And I just want to clarify for people listening: are you saying that possibly somewhere there could be a version of the Crossroads that's over a World So Cruel, beat or close to?
I had the master, and I might still have the master. But I had the master for forever, and I think the last time I saw it was maybe a couple years ago. still on a 2-inch master,
Wow.
in a small box, a small unmarked white box. And there's a version of that, but then there's also a longer version of Crossroads that I think I have on a DAT tape, because I had to study it to figure out what other cut to make, because it still wasn't under radio. And I remember the engineer at the radio, and him and I became friends and worked on quite a few albums after that. But I remember, like, I felt bad because I was redoing his work. But then, you know, you get the call from Relativity, you know, and it's like, hey, I need you to do something. And what's even funnier is that, you know, when we were doing we were doing the Mo Thugs album, and we weren't getting paid. And I had a little bit more legal knowledge of the business. And I'm like, yo, you know, I'm a little bit of a louder voice. So now the guys are getting upset. Not only getting upset, they're getting mad. And, you know, and it's like, you know, F Bob, he tripping. Why you saying you did this? And I was like, but I did do that. I understand that, but, you know, we did this and everything else. I'm like, but okay. So there became a situation where sooner or later we were going to see each other in court. And that broke my heart, because it's like, you know, why are we fighting about this? This, you know, we know who did what. But then what made it even funnier is that I'm still getting calls from the label. So now the Mo Thugs album is done. It's about the first one.
Yeah.
They're picking out records, and I get a call from New York. It's like, hey, I need you to mix this album because it's not coming in time. And they secretly gave me the masters, Relativity, and flew me to New York. And I missed that whole album at Private Island. Not at Private, in New York. And it took about 3 or 4 days to mix the whole album down, because they really needed it done. It was like more of those type of things where I would get, and I was getting more of those calls from the industry, like, hey, I need you to do this. We're going to pay you X amount of dollars. We can't give you credit. But the money was right. So, you know, if someone says, I'm going to give you 15, 20, 30K, and you've been starving for like a whole 2 years, everything else, you go ahead and get that. So I'm in New York. I'm mixing the album. Steve Lobel sees me at the hotel. I was like, I need to get that guy's album. Yo, they're still kind of mad at you. I said, I get that, but I need to give him the album, you know, so he can listen to it, because I'm not going to turn this in to Relativity and let them run it without their approval. Mad or not, they need to see it. So I remember coming to the hotel. I see Steve Lobel. They're about to get the award for Crossroads. You know, I have the Mo Thug album master on a CD. They're about to go the American Music Awards perform. That's when they're all in white, right? American Music Awards was Grammy.
Yeah.
American Music Awards, right?
Yeah. Well, they did the white a couple times. So, yeah, you're thinking about the AMAs, yeah.
Yeah, so the AMAs, Steve Lobel gives me a ticket to the AMAs for bringing an album. I see Ant. I'm like, hey, you need to hear this. This is your album. He's like, thank you. We really didn't say much, and kind of like parted ways. I'll meet y'all in New York. Funny part about it was like, I'm backstage. I get there just in time, ready for the performance. The guys go on stage. I'm backstage. I'm a mess. First of all, there's 2 big criers in this. Michael Jordan cries. So does Terrell Owens. So forget y'all for telling y'all that I'm sitting there. I'm in a tear. I'm in a tear. All of a sudden, behind me, I'm like, I hear what's up? It's Tupac, because I had just got finished work with him at Artemis Records. Tupac was like, hey, congratulations. That's dope. We got to do some more work together. Give me a hug. He goes off. He had the gray suit on with the gold medallion. He goes on. He's about to go ahead and get to his seat, because we're backstage. The guys just come off. And that was pretty much the last time I saw Tupac before the Vegas thing.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. I'm guessing that had to have been probably early 96, mid 96, somewhere in there, because, of course, we know Family Scriptures dropped at the end of 1996. It dropped in November of 96.
Yeah.
I'm guessing you're simultaneously, while you're working on that, you must also be working on Flesh and Bones record, because his came out November 19th of 96. So those records dropped very close. So, I mean, were you simultaneously working on these records?
This what happened. Like, the studio and the label was worried about me because I think I hadn't slept in 5 days. I'm producing Bone stuff. I'm producing other stuff that they want to get for their next album. And then, they're working on tracks. It's foundation tracks. Don't know if it's going to make it because Unique's still working with them, 100%. But then, Anthony's using whatever I have as like a bed to write to. So it's kind of like I'm like the junior varsity for the Bone album, for the next Bone album. Then I'm working on Mo Thug. So he wants me to focus on the Mo Thug stuff. And then I'm getting, I'm working on Flesh's stuff. Now, at that time, when we were in L.A., when I think I skipped out, Flesh and Bone and I were roommates because when we were all in, we stayed in this apartment complex in Burbank, and we had like about 8 to 12 units. But some of them are bunked up like 2 or 3 people, like 2 True stayed together, Graveyard Shift stayed together, maybe 2 units. So then, it was like there was only one left. It was like, well, you can stay with Flesh. So I say Flesh. I meet this girl at the time, and we're roommates. So then Flesh and I was, locked in working on his album. We had a concept ready and everything else. We had the whole thing laid out. But what happened, the label was like, are you going to be okay? So then all of a sudden there was this guy that's hanging around the studio. His name is Damon Elliott. He said he was Dionne Warwick's child and everything. You stayed in the studio. He's a big fan. He's a big boy, so he befriends the guys. And then Romeo's in off in the other studio working on a song. I don't know what track he was working on, but he's working on some of his own solo stuff. So I'm like, Romeo, I need you to play on this song. So he's playing on Flesh's World So Cruel. And then I was like, well, I need you on this other song too, which was, I think, Trey's song. And then he played on another song for me too. And then he befriended the guys. So then Damon Elliott's manager, his name is Glenn. He comes in and he's like, hey, I wanted to play some of his tracks for the guys. Now, I already know the guys, and pretty much they're passive aggressive, meaning that they ain't gonna tell you your shit sucks, but either you like it or you don't. So they kind of like they were like indifferent. I couldn't get a beat on this night when he was playing the tracks, because then like Ed and I had this eye contact, and it was like if he liked it, it's good, but if he didn't like it, it's like get him out of there. So, but they didn't give me nothing. So Damon's playing the tracks and everything else, and they were like, well, hey, I want to submit some tracks too. And I'm like, Steve was like, this guy wants to submit some tracks for the group. What do you think? And I'm like, well, I can't do everything because then I'm getting, I'm like I said, the labels were like, hey, you doing, you've got to get some rest. You can't be doing 2 albums simultaneously. We're doing about 4 or 5, and they're double teaming you. So I'm getting in the studio at 9 a.m. I maybe get a little chance for lunch. I'm about to leave at 5, but nope, another crew is coming in. So then you're there at 10, and it's like, oh, nope, the third shift crew is coming in. They need to write. So Damon, I kind of like opened the door and let Damon go ahead and produce some stuff. And, he got more tracks in there, maybe than I wanted to let him in there, but, I didn't care at the time. I figured it was enough to go around. And then, Damon Elliott got production on Flesh's project because it wasn't really on the back burner, but it was a lot of stuff. They wanted to make sure that I got that Mo Thugs first. And Flesh's project, even though that was my baby, because then it was like him and I had already connected. We were already on one accord, and we already knew what we wanted to do. But, Damon, got in there and got those tracks done, and it was what it was. So, it's like that my production on Flesh and Bones album got cut in half because there still was so many other things that we needed to do and that they wanted me to do. And plus the fact that the label was sending me masters and flying me off to New York to go ahead and mix these projects and then flying me back. And it was like, it's like Flesh, like, where you at? And I'm like, man, I had to tell him, like, I'm mixing the guys' albums, and he's like, all right, well, when you get back, I'm going to do these songs with Damon, and all this other, all this stuff, and those songs ended up making the album.
I remember when talking to Romeo, he pretty much remembered it almost identical as far as, Damien Elliott and how he got involved. And he was just like, there was just so much shit to do. He's like, I wanted to be involved with that record. He's like, there wasn't enough time to do everything. And eventually it opened the gates to bring in, more people. I noticed that while talking about the Flesh and Bone record, Truth Unbelievable United Gathering Souls, that you kept saying the label. Now we know, of course, that record was his solo debut, and it came out on Def Jam. Did Def Jam really have anything to do with like the recording piece, or was that pretty much like a Mo Thug record that just got submitted to Def Jam and put out?
So I'm in New York, still mixing projects. I'm actually doing now. I'm working with Run DMC at the time. Jam Master Jay was like, "Hey, I heard you guys out in LA struggle. Do some production for me." So Jam Master Jay through Steve LaBelle would throw me some cash, and I would do some production for him. I get a call from Russell. Russell was like, "I heard you in town. I need to talk about this Flesh and Bone record." So Russell flies me in. Have to come down to Def Jam outfit. So I'm sitting in there with Russell, Leo Coin, and we talking about what's my view for the Flesh album. They hadn't heard anything, but I had some of the songs on me. So I'm playing it. The executives come in. This is the first time they're hearing it. They singing my praises. They singing Flesh's praises. This is going to be amazing. They're already doing the treatment for World So Cruel in their head. But the song wasn't finished yet. It was like, I'm still working on it. I ain't really put the finishing touches on it. So then Run comes in. Run, because he comes in to pick me up to go to the studio for finish his song. Run, we actually ended up doing the foundation of that big song, What's Going On. We had all the artists.
Oh, yeah.
I did the foundation start beat with Run. So that became the big thing. Yeah, but it was like a few years later that came out. 9/11 happened, and then that came out, and I was like, hey, I still got this track that never came out on Run, and they, everybody else jumped on it, and that became history. But I remember being in the office with Russell and Run, and they're fighting. Run liked the song as it is. Bobby, don't touch it. Russell was like, melody, hook, 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 hook. I want the song to get to the hook as fast as possible. He wanted me to cut, Flesh had about 32 bars before we got to the hook. He wanted me to cut it to 4 bars. I'm like, I can't cut it to 4 bars. You'll never get to the point. So he made it like, well, give me 8. Says double time. You got to at least give me 16. Give me 16. They fighting back and forth. So Russell and Run are fighting in the studio. Me and Cliff, me and Leo Korn are off in the corner trying to referee them because they're arguing about the state of World So Cruel. So, Run was like, I got to be on this track, and I was like, well, you're going to get a part on it, but still let me do what I need to do. So it was like Def Jam, to answer your question, Def Jam had a lot of input in it, and they actually heard the album, ironically, a little bit before Bone heard most of the album. Because then I already had it on me, because I just happened to have it in my pocket because I was working on other projects.
It seemed like Def Jam, and rightfully so. This was a smart move at that time, right? You got Flesh and Bone. He is like he's like the bone that isn't in the deal. We all know that
he's the fifth member.
So you got this fifth member kind of floating around, but he's heavily connected. And of course, the Crossroads is blowing up at this time. It was a smart move to take him on. It seemed like World So Cruel was the Def Jam attempt to really cash in on the success of the Crossroads. I mean, even the video, you got a guy in the long trench coat, leather jacket with the black glasses and the hat, and he looked very much like, the same guy that was in the Crossroads who became, the angel at the end.
I'm going to stop you right there. So that, like I said, Russell is in his office, standing on his desk. He was like, Bobby, whatever you do, I want a Crossroads too. You my man. So then he was like, let's go out to dinner. So we go out to dinner, and we went to the restaurant where Britt Ratner was there. Britt Ratner we're at his table. There's models everywhere, and they're like, "This is my man, and he's gonna make me another Crossroads too." It was like dope. So then we go to this wine cellar, and he was like, I want to talk to you more about the song before I let you go. I don't drink, but this wine cellar, they had this like 3 million year old wine down there, and I was like, nah, I'm cool on that. And he was like, he's giving his last vision to make sure that we do it. But his main thing was that he wanted a Crossroads 2 in any worst ways possible. Whatever I could do production-wise, he wanted to make sure that he got that vibe. And I'm like I told you in the office, I got you. I don't know how many times you need to bring this home, but I got you. And then,
and of course, you're sitting on a beat that you literally know was the fucking Crossroads. That they really did a version over this beat. So of course you're truly sitting on the Crossroads 2 beat to do this.
And they wanted to make sure I was on board because I told them I had that. That's what ended my session with Run at the studio, because Run was on priority. I'm working on his solo project, and that was like, yo, whatever they do, I need him in there. He's sick because I just because again it's like I'm not really knowing the complexity of what it is, so I'm matter-of-factly saying I got the original track that Crossroads is made on. It's World So Cruel. He's on you, so I'm gonna make sure that you're gonna get what you do. He's like, what? All of a sudden, there's a Lincoln in front of the studio, and we're on our way to Def Jam. So he was like, yeah, I'm playing it for him, and he was like, yep, that's it. And then we playing the song, and mind you, I still hadn't put the hook on it yet. Just like it was kind of like I didn't clean up Fletcher's vocals yet. They just wanted to make sure they heard it because again, it's like they can't believe that they're about to luck up with gold twice. I was like, I got you. So then they wanted to make sure. So that whole night, I'm more like, let me get to work. And they're trying to wine and dine me to make sure I'm on board. I'm like, dude, I was on board when you had me in the studio. But again, they don't know me, I don't know them. So they went above and beyond to make sure we got what we got, and they got it. They got World So Cruel, and then they got the whole treatment and everything else, and that was specifically supposed to be Crossroads 2.
Yeah, every time I see that video, I'm like, this is almost like a spin-off. If you've ever seen like a movie and then you see a spin-off, I'm like, this is a fucking look. This has got characters from the Crossroads in this video. I just think that at that time, and I feel like that's probably Flesh's best record. But at that time, I just don't think that he could carry that on his own, and that's probably why they threw Rev Run in it. And I think that's probably...
Well, no, well, let me get back to you. So then Flesh is like the fifth member, and he did a lot of work with Bones' album, but couldn't with Ruthless. Tamika still wouldn't sign him to the group. Right. So Def Jam had that whole deal, and it was supposed to be a one-off and everything else. And there was Crazy actually was a vote there, but now Ruthless is not letting Crazy be on that album. Now, and then Crazy kind of, Crazy's very soft-spoken, but when he says something, he means it, and I always listen to him. So Crazy was like, but, kind of like, that was our song. I said, it is, but we got to let him have it, because this is what they want to do, and it's going to extend the life and everything else. Whatever, I remember saying that, I remember having to talk to Crazy, like, kind of like, he didn't want the song to go that far. And I was like, dude, the powers that be already had that. And this is where it's at. And he kind of like went along with it, begrudgingly or not. But he actually had a verse on there. And supposedly, Wish wanted to be on the track too. But because Ruthless was like, clamping down and like, oh no, you guys are not going to make a Crossroads 2 for another label. They kind of banned it from there, and then Run had to be on the track and everything else. And that was like a Steve Mobile fixing it and making sure that it worked and went through.
Beyond the harmony for the fans, we celebrate. Uploading the videos every Thursday, so join us. Beyond the harmony for the fans, we celebrate. Uploading the videos every Thursday, so join us. Beyond the harmony for the fans, we celebrate. Uploading the videos every Thursday, so join us. Beyond the harmony for the fans, we celebrate.